what's up? This is Simon from the Ionic Academy. In this quick one, I will show you how you can easily add authorization headers or any kind of headers to your HTTP request using an HTTP interceptor. So you don't have to add those headers manually all the time. You can create one file that will basically intercept every HTTP call, GET, POST, PUT, whatever it is from your app to another resource, and then modify it on the fly without anything else you need to do. So let's dive into it. I've already created a blank new app, and the first thing we're gonna do is add our provider using the standard Ionic command. So now we got our interceptor in here and we need to make a few changes. So first of all, we need to say this interceptor implements the HTTP interceptor. And wow, it's actually working today, which is pretty amazing. What we need as well in here is, of course, yes, the HTTP client, not really needed because we will only intercept the calls, but we will also use the Ionic storage. So let's see if the import is working. No, I thought so. So let's go to our app module and import the Ionic storage module from add Ionic storage, and then add this to our imports. And of course, as we're making HTTP calls, we also need the HTTP client module. So from add Angular common, Angular common HTTP, and then add this to our imports as well. And of course, here we got the for root command as well. All right, now we got this in place. Perfect. So our interceptor should now have one function, and this is the intercept function. And I would love to have the signature automatically, but let me bring it in so I don't make any errors. This interceptor is now called every time the app sends out an HTTP request and we have access to this HTTP request. And what we want to do is we want to check if there's a token stored in the Ionic storage. So if it was saved previously, then we want to add it as a header, which is a common mechanism if you're using something like JSON Web Tokens or any kind of token authentication, OAuth, whatever it is. Most of the time you store the token and then you need it when you make the call. So let's do this. First of all, we need to retrieve our token from the storage, which means get whatever it is, my token. And then in the end, the interceptor wants to return an observable. So therefore, we need to make sure that we're not returning a promise, but finally returning an observable. And therefore, we can go ahead with return observable from promise, which is the promise we just created. And then it gets a bit more tricky and into details. Let me bring in 2 more lines for RxJS, which we will need pretty soon. So the first one is merge map. Let's do this from promise. I had this error previously. I think it was fixed by using it like this. Okay. Is not. Of course, this is get. I don't want get item. All right. So we need to return the observable, which we're doing with from promise, but we don't want to return the token in the intercept. We need to return the modified request. And therefore merge map will simply change what we are gonna return in our statement. So here we can return in another observable. And what we do in here is we need to clone our request and add the header. So let's add a function add token. And this one gets a request as well, HTTP request, and also a token, let's say any. And the HTTP request also needs any, I think. Okay, So in our function, we can now check if, somebody passed a token to us. And if that's the case, we're gonna make a clone of our HTTP request. So this will be a clone. And then we say the clone is equal request.clone. And now we can set the headers in here and do whatever we want to the request, and finally call return the clone. And then nothing really changes. We just modified the request. It's still totally valid, and that's the way to go. So in here you can now set whatever you want. For example, you can set something like the content type to accept application JSON, just as an example. JSON, please. Or yeah, content type as well, application JSON, whatever you need. But most important, what you want to do in here is set the authorization header or whatever you backend expect. But most of the time it's something like this with a bearer and then the token. I think don't likes if you do it like this. Okay, so now we have modified the headers for the request. We return the clone. Also, otherwise we can simply return the request again. If we don't have a token, we don't need to change anything. So now back to our merge map, where we now say let cloned request, which is of course not always cloned, but let's just assume this. We pass in the actual request we are intercepting and the token we got from our storage. And then we need to fix this because it's not assignable to whatever. We're currently returning void, but we need something else to return. And therefore we return now next, which is also passed to our intercept function, and call please handle our where it is, the cloned request. And we could finish it at this point. But what you can do or might want to do, as well as we're already in the intercept, which intercepts everything in here. And let me just get this right so we don't see the arrows anymore. We might want to handle an error directly at this point. So we can say pipe, which is a bit new way. Previously we've mostly used map, or in this case merge map with an observable, but with pipe we can also chain different actions or different handlers. So we want to catch the error in here and then do whatever you like with the error. Let me just bring in the code from the actual tutorial, which you can find below this video. So perhaps you just want to get the message from the actual error and directly display an alert. Everything's totally possible. Just make sure that you in the end still return the error back to the initial caller of the HTTP request, so they don't assume the request was successful. And for our alert, we might need the alert controller. So there we go. Of course, now we would display always general error. If your backend is returning the right error messages and titles, that might work. Otherwise, you have specific errors, like the username is missing for a login or the password is missing. So you don't want to show it failed. You want to have a bit more specific error codes. But what you could do perhaps is checking for the error code in here. Let's say it's 40, I think what's 401 is not authorized, I think. So you could check for specific error codes and display the general message that's related to them. So you're not authenticated, there was a server error. Stuff like this could be immediately handled in here, so you don't have to do it in the single HTTP calls in another place. All right, enough of the talk. Our interceptor class is ready. Now we need to edit. Also, I'm gonna start the Ionic lab in the background. It's actually just a word on this. If you run Ionic serve and then change the URL to Ionic lab, you get the same, but with Ionic lab, it's the same like Ionic serve, but the lab view opens. I hope you could follow my explanation. So our interceptor was already added here, but actually we need to change this. And we need to first of all import the HTTP interceptors, and then just like the error handler, we say we provide for the HTTP interceptors use class our interceptor provider. What's wrong? HTTP interceptors from common HTTP provide, of course, not provider. Provide, come on. And then we also need to add this to prevent any errors using multiple interceptors or providers. So now my lab command should be open somewhere. Let's see, cannot find module dot. That's an interesting one. Let's see if there's something wrong. I had problems using this a few days ago with, yeah, exactly. For some auto imports, Visual Studio Code adds this at the end, which totally breaks the app with this super reasonable explanation. I'm not exactly sure what's wrong. Well, of course the storage is not imported properly. So come on, where's the Ionic import? There. Okay, and back to loading. So by now your app is hopefully loading as it should. And my app, yes, is working again. Perfect. So we got the interceptor in place, we provided it, so it will be automatically used. Now let's test some functionalities. I will build the most basic authentication, so authenticated false, and perhaps we want to display a little message to the users. And then we need the private HTTP client, and we also need the storage to store a token. Okay, then we create a few functions. So first of all, we want to set our auth date. Normally you would do this after a login. We will do a dummy like in here. Then we want to perform a successful GET request to a resource just to see if our headers are added. And then we want to get a failed request to see that our alert is working. So just a few tests for all the things we've implemented. So if we're already authenticated. So if we call it with true, we want to log in the user, so log in more or less. We basically set my token, make sure that you got this perhaps even as a constant in one place, because we're using it here and we're using it here. This can be dangerous. So set it to whatever, my special header token 123, and then in the completion we say this authenticated true. Okay, that's a very dummy implementation for login, and I don't recommend anything like this for production. If we want to log out the user, we simply remove the token from the storage. So here you would normally have the JSON web token that you got from the server after a successful login, and you store it inside. Perhaps you have a behavior subject that you subscribe to that emits the user is now authenticated. Again, this is the basic version of this. If you have any questions about this authentication mechanism or how you could build it, just ask below the video or the quick win. We will find a solution. Back to topic, we want to make a successful GET request. So no, it should be called like this. It's too early today, I think. All right, so I picked the famous Poker API for the test. So this will open the Poker API, as you can see, with a little result. And then we subscribe to the result, and we will use our message field just to show that we got a response for testing. You can also simply log this out if you want to, but let's do it like this. And the first Pokemon name will be displayed as a message. Now we also want to make a failed request. Of course, we do this intentionally. Normally it just happens, so not valid, whatever. And we subscribe, and now actually we won't get any result in here. So we can basically leave this empty. But what we want to catch is the error, and then say this error equals error.message. And I think something, what is wrong with this Visual Studio Code today? Please. Okay. Anyway, this will fail. We don't need the data, but we subscribe also to the error block, and then we will catch the message. Now it's finally time to add the buttons for this. It's actually the most basic view, and I will just copy everything I got into it. So what we got is a card with the auth state and the message for whatever will be displayed. And then we got a button to log in a user, to log out. So either of them, just one is displayed at a time. Then we got the successful and get failed URL. All right, let's give all of this a try. And what we need in here, very hard in this tutorial, is the developer tools. I'm using Google Chrome, but I think even Firefox and Safari, all of them have those tools. They just might look a bit different. In the beginning, our auth state is false. So let's try to get a URL. And if you're in the network tab, you will see which URLs are requested. And here we see the request headers. Looks pretty much like we didn't change anything in here. And that's totally valid, of course. So let's get the URL with an error, and we see failure, response, whatever, without having an additional code in our request here. We just catch the message to display it in here, but we wouldn't have to do. So we now have one place where we could display all the error messages. Perhaps you return a specific status code from the backend, and that might be resolved. So then you could have all of this logic in just one place in the interceptor and don't need to handle the errors specifically in all your HTTP client requests in the pages. All right, let's see what happens if we log in. My auth state is true, we're successfully logged in. So let's get the URL, and why did it come twice? Not sure. So let's take a look, and there we see the authorization header was set to BRAM, my special header token, and also the content type. So both fields we added to the clone request in here are now appearing inside the request. And if you had the security mechanism in place in your server, you could now make authorized requests if you have this type of authentication implemented. For the error, the call is still not valid. Even I don't know if the header was sent. Should, but I don't know why it's not here. I think because we didn't even get a response for the course pre-flight. So let's log out again, and then we see our token is again not in the header because it was deleted from the storage, so it can't be fine, and therefore the normal request will be used. All right, so that's how you can easily add tokens or whatever kind of fields to your HTTP headers. This is especially interesting for stuff like a JSON Web Token, authentication, or OAuth, because most of them require you to have this authorization field with a token, and now you can easily make the call to your backend, store the token in the Ionic storage, and the interceptor will automatically use the token from the storage. There are other packages, and we've used the JSON Web Token package for this as well. You can also add more logic for checking if the token is not expired. But this interceptor is a good place for your app to automatically add the headers, perhaps add some error checking, and also start the OAuth dance to get refresh access token, all of this if something goes wrong during your requests. I hope you enjoyed this quick win. If you did, make sure to subscribe to this channel for more Ionic videos, and also check out the ionicacademy.com where this quick win appeared, which is a platform to learn Ionic with video courses, projects, and an awesome community, and I'd love to have you inside. So check it out, have a great day, and I'll see you inside the next video.